I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're going to introduce you to an amazing book, a remarkable thriller called The Undying. It is written by Joseph Eric Crawford. It is a gripping fiction novel. Join us as we look into investigative reporter Sheila Barton and occult expert Rider Hague as they delve into a world of darkness and evil stemming from an encounter with the supernatural that challenges their beliefs and threatens their very existence. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank our team at Prime 7 Media for helping us put him in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support writers like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his wonderful book. The links are below this interview. Joe, thanks so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Happy to be here, Logan.
We got to dispel the rumors right from the start. We're both Crawfords, but we're not related as far as we know.
As far as we know.
You never know. You could be a distant cousin or a near cousin for that matter. Loved your book from the very time I picked it up and looked at the title and the book cover. The Undying kind of got to me as kind of a cool concept. Let's give the folks at home an overview of what The Undying is all about.
Well, it's about a female investigative reporter. Her name is Sheila Barton. She had a weird sort of like a encounter when she was like 9 or 10 years old. So it really fed into her hunger to find out more about the supernatural and the unexplained. So she becomes an investigative reporter, and her forte is just tracking down stories that are involved with some kind of unexplainable encounters or origin,
right, phenomenon that we don't normally understand.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
And then she joins forces with an expert in the occult, Rider Hague, of course. And tell us a little bit about him.
Well, I always joke around with people because even though I call him Professor Hague in the book, if you read it, he's not really a professor of a professor. He's professor in his own mind, basically, but he's an expert in all things occult. So he decides that he wants to contact Sheila, and he kind of becomes her
mentor or
source, her source, like an unnamed source or whatever. So whenever she gets when he finds out something interesting about a supernatural occurrence, then he contacts her, and then she goes to investigate it. So
it's a great premise. It reminds me a little bit, of course, in a much more updated fashion. There was a TV show back in the 1970s called
Night Stalker.
The Night Stalker with Darren McGavin, which was one of my favorite TV shows. I loved it. I don't know if it stands the test of time. Have you watched it recently?
I watched it a couple of years ago after I found out about it. I didn't know about it until after I wrote The Undying. And then I read about Night Stalker. It was an investigative reporter who looks into the supernatural. And I was like, I gotta watch this because I just want to see how close it is to what I came up with.
Exactly. Well, that was the 70s.
What's that? It's a great show. It still holds up, I think.
I'll have to check it out again. Like I said, I used to love it. It was on late night on ABC, I think, at like 10:30 at night in the 70s, and it was one of my favorites. And Darren McGavin, you probably know him from A Christmas Story. He's a terrific actor no matter what he's in. And he was great in this because he was kind of bumbling and kind of serious at the same time. But I think it's time we had an updated investigative reporter who is investigating unexplained phenomenon. So have you thought about Sheila Barton in a TV series or a movie, perhaps?
No, not really. The thing is, you read the book, so you know how it ends.
Right.
Exactly. The thing is, a couple of people who are friends and acquaintances came up with a way for me to continue the story after the way I ended it. And they have good premises. But my problem is once I've told a story with characters, I usually don't like to go back to them because I don't want to keep telling stories that I don't have any passion in.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
I told the story with Sheila, and I don't think I have anything else for her.
Okay. Well, this could be a standalone movie then. That's for sure, where it's all resolved within 2 hours, which would be great too. So I think it'd be a terrific venue for that. What are you working on right now? Anything?
I'm working on a couple things actually. I'm collaborating with a friend. She's a writer as well, and we're trying to uh, work on sort of like a. This is going to sound cliched. It's like a zombie story, but it's not because we're bringing in a different kind of like a source to it.
Hmm.
And then I'm also working on a science fiction novel because I'm deeply into science fiction as well. And it's sort of combination of between, I don't know, maybe a little bit of like Dune and Buck Rogers and a little bit stuff like that because it's kind of almost space opera, but not quite space opera.
Right.
But I love Dune because it's such an interesting story. And Buck Rogers, I grew up watching Buck Rogers, so it's
Yeah.
still fascinating to me, the whole man out of time thing. So
Exactly. Exactly.
those
So
are two things I'm working on right now.
that's awesome. They both sound wonderful. So I was going to ask you who are your inspirations, but obviously Buck Rogers. What was it called? Buck Rogers in the 21st century, the one you used to watch? Because there
25th
was an
century.
old movie series back in like the
Yes,
1940s called Buck Rogers also.
yes, that was Buster Crabbe, and then I grew
Right.
up in the 70s, and it was Gil Gerard was Buck
Right.
Rogers.
Gil
Yes.
Gerard. That's a name from the past, that's for
Yes,
sure.
sure is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. Could you explain to the folks at home without giving too much away what you mean by the Undying in your title?
Sure. I love the old Universal monster movies from the 30s and 40s. So, the Dracula, Frankenstein, Wolfman, and the Mummy.
Hmm.
But I don't like to take pre-established characters because I know I'm going to change them and I know I'm going to do things with them that people who are actually fans of these characters are not going to like. So I create my own. So I have a vampire, a she-wolf, uh, a high priestess, and an artificial being, and they're amalgamations of other monsters as well. So I just kind of wanted to write something that was really, really fun, the way
Hmm.
that those Universal monster movies were, but had a little bit of depth to it. That way people could glom on to something, especially the human characters. So I wanted my main character to be a female investigative reporter because I grew up in in a house full of women and I know how strong women can be and still
Right.
remain feminine.
Yep.
And I just wanted to focus on like have the monsters be incidental to the story. I didn't
Mhm.
want them to be the focus of the story, but to always be on the outer fringes of the story and being a sort of like an underlying threat for the entire book. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you did a
and
great job of making Sheila seem very real,
thank you.
despite circumstances around her that other people might be, questioning whether they could or could not be real. But by
Right,
having
right.
her so grounded makes the rest of it believable.
And that's one of the things that I was hoping that would come through.
Mhm.
Because when I write anything, no matter what it is, I look for the reality of what I'm trying to convey to people and what the situation is. So if it's too out there, then I'm not going to enjoy it.
Exactly.
So if I'm not going to enjoy it, I don't think my readers will enjoy it.
Tell me a little bit about your writing career. When did you begin writing and how many books have you written?
Well, I started out. I wanted to be a screenwriter. Actually, I was. No, I'm sorry. Let me.
Sure.
I started writing when I was 16. I was in high school. And I started writing like fiction stories, just like little short stories and stuff like that. Never got anything published, but it was just fun for me because my imagination is just always going off.
Right.
So then, as I got older, I wanted to be a writer, but I wanted to be a screenwriter.
Mhm.
So then I started writing screenplays. I wrote a couple of screenplays, and then because I bought a book on writing screenplays by
Mhm.
William Goldman, I think it was actually by the guy who wrote Chinatown.
Hmm.
And then I wrote a couple screenplays, but then the more research I did into becoming a screenwriter, the less I wanted to be a screenwriter because you read how screenwriters like when they're interviewed, it's like that's not really the story I wrote. Somebody came in behind me and they changed a lot of things that I wrote, even though the Writers Guild says that I have to keep my name on the screen. That's not the story that I wrote. So I thought to myself, like, I really don't want people messing with The Undying, because The Undying, out of everything I've written, that is my most favorite. It's my baby. It's precious to me. But
Wonderful.
I wrote my first screenplay was actually the original title was Straight Racer. It was like a slasher flick, but
Mhm.
it's set back in the 1870s in West Virginia. So so a friend of mine told me, she's like, that's a little bit on the nose. So I changed the title to Fear in Red Meadow, because it was a play on Blue Field from West Virginia.
Mhm.
So I took Red Meadow. Plus, it played good for the actual story because people are getting killed all over the place. So the meadow was definitely going to be red with blood. So, but then I wrote The Undying, and I didn't like the screenplay, so I decided to turn it into a novel. But I could never find the through line for my novel. So it took me 8 years to finish The Undying, and probably at least 6 or 7 different drafts, because I was never satisfied with what I was trying to get through. And as for other things, I haven't really published anything else. I've been working since I published The Undying uh, in 2017 on other stories, but nothing just was anything that I could get motivated behind. And
Right.
then I just recently had the Undying republished with a new cover, because I didn't like the old cover that I had on it before.
Yeah. Well, the new cover is terrific. The book is great. I can see why you're invested in this book because it is your baby, and sometimes your first work is your best work. I'm not trying to cap your career anywhere,
No, no, no.
but that's the one you've been thinking about for years and years. That's the one you've been
Yes,
trialing. That was your creation. So it all
yes.
comes together wonderfully in this book. It is called The Undying. It is written by Joseph Eric Crawford. It is a gripping fiction novel. A story
Mhm.
about Sheila Barton, who is an investigative reporter, and her sidekick, if you will, occult expert Rider Hague, as they delve into a world of darkness and evil. It's a great, great read. Before we leave you here today, Joe, anything you'd like to add and tell the audience?
Um, just please check out the book.
Yeah,
I think you'll enjoy it. Every person, whether they're related to me or just a sort of acquaintance, whatever, everyone who's read it has really loved it. I
yeah,
have not got a bad review on it from anyone who's read that book yet.
yeah.
So
I
that
can
is
see
very
why.
heartening. Yeah, it's very
It's a
heartening.
great read. It kind of feels like an instant classic. So pick it up. The links are below this interview. Joe, thanks so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you, Logan. I appreciate it.
I appreciate your time. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.